If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this. People, what was the most creepy, supernatural, unexplained experience you've ever had? When I was a child, my grandparents' house always creeped me out. I was terrified of the basement, and there was something off about the rest of the house. Once, when I was 10, my mom and I were sleeping in my grandpa's bed. I couldn't sleep, and I was facing the middle of the bed, so the back of my head was near the space between the bed and the wall or window. All of a sudden, I feel something poke the back of my head twice. I was petrified and frozen, so I never turned my head to see what was poking me. To this day, I don't know what could have happened, but I can still feel those pokes. I was young, 5 to 7, somewhere in there. I was sleeping in between my parents for whatever reason. I woke up, and I remember the clock reading around 4 a.m. There was something standing by the window, looking out into the front yard. It looked like a man in a brown wool robe, about 6 feet 4 inches or so. I started to stir and sat up in bed, and the thing turned and looked at me. Dear God, that face. Extremely pale white skin, lots of really pronounced wrinkles, and the face drooped like it was melting, down into a really pointy chin, almost similar to a scream mask but with all of the features of a living being. Its mouth was hanging open, and its eyes were wide, almost like it was worried or frightened. It kept its gaze on me while it moved away from the window, in front of the bed, and out the open bedroom door. The second it exited the room, the lights turned on their own, and both of my parents jumped up on either side of me, breathing heavily like they'd both just woken up from a nightmare. To be clear, I was fully able to move during this. I don't think it was sleep paralysis, but I'm not sure what it could have been other than some kind of demon or really ducking ugly ghost. I've never seen it since, but I can still picture it as clear as day. I was out at our cabin in the remote mountainous wilderness of Colorado with my dad and had to use the bathroom in the middle of the night. This necessitated a flashlight and shoes because the outhouse was far away. There was no one but me and my dad for miles in any direction. So I thought. I suddenly heard voices in the distance and stopped in my tracks. It seemed to be coming from my right, deep in the woods in the middle of nowhere, a quarter of a mile from the road. Being 11 and unafraid of the world, I foolishly yelled, "Who's out there?" There was silence for a few seconds, then a shouted string of profanity so vulgar that it terrified my virgin ears. I stood still for a moment like a terrified rabbit but heard nothing else, so I ran back to the house and woke my dad up. He got up, loaded his gun, and turned all the lights on, but we never heard another sound. To this day, we have not seen or heard another person within 15 miles of the cabin. I grew up in a small town and lived out in the country. My mom and I were coming home from Walmart really late one night and decided to take the back way home. I still had my learner's permit, so I wanted to take a road with less traffic. Anyone who has ever lived in or been to the country knows how creepy these roads can be at night. I was going around a curve, right before a one-lane bridge, so I slowed down in case I had to stop. Out of nowhere, this woman jumps in front of me on the driver's side of my car and starts pounding on the hood of my car. Her mouth was moving, but I couldn't make out what she was saying. My mom started freaking out and told me not to stop and just keep driving. I kept going, and we both looked back to see where she was, but no one was there. To this day, my mom and I still remember it clearly. It turns out there's apparently a legend about a woman who died around the bridge and supposedly can be seen sometimes late at night. I get goosebumps to this day just thinking about it. The time I was pushed down the stairs by a shadow man when I was 14. My friend Gracie lived in a gorgeous old house in an area called Missionary Ridge, where a battle in the Civil War was fought. Sort of an exciting area for the ghost hunting type. She has always been able to see things. Particularly the shadow man, a dark figure that liked to hang around on the 3rd floor of the gigantic house. Her little sister, maybe 5 at the time, decided she wanted to play hide and seek. Gracie and I ran up to the 3rd floor without thinking. The moon was full and bright through the window as we leaned over the banister to see if her sister was following us. We heard a loud thumps right between us and saw a dark figure run away from us down into the hallway, then it started running back towards us. Gracie screamed and ran down the stairs. I ran after her. Right when I got to the edge of the stairs, I felt ice-cold hands on my back, and I tumbled all the way down. At first, I tried to rationalize it. My legs are short, and my pants always drag the floor. I totally tripped over my pants. Or I slipped on the immaculate, shiny wood floors. Nope. Gracie screaming, "Mom!" The shadow man shoved down the stairs. Cleared that up for me. I was outside rollerblading one evening with my brother when I was around 8 years old. At one point, I glanced up and saw what looked like a very tall man wearing a trench coat and a Freddy Krueger-style fedora. This thing was just pure black, though. There were no features, just a very distinct outline of a big, black, shadowy man. It was sunny out too, so whatever it was stood out tremendously. I stared at it for a few seconds and then looked away, and when I looked back, it was gone. For years, I tried to rationalize it, thinking it must have been a trick of the brain, but I could always remember the image of what I saw so clearly, and there was never a realistic explanation. Then, when I was about 17, I was just browsing a paranormal site for entertainment, and there was a photo gallery of various beings, and all of a sudden my blood went cold because I saw a drawing of exactly what I'd seen all those years ago. It's apparently some sort of shadow being called Hat Man, and it's been spotted, usually by children, all over the world. I don't even tell people this because it sounds so weird, but I know what I saw that day, and I immediately recognized a drawing of it almost 10 years later. I can't even begin to guess what it really was, but at least I know other people have seen the same thing. Incident 1, 2017, when I was about 9 to 10 years old, I moved to a new town, where I still live today. My family bought an old house that was built in 1812. One night when my stepdad was at work, the power went out, so me, my mom, and my sister all slept in the same room together, my room, and I woke up randomly in the middle of the night, and there was a large man in all black standing over my bedsides, and he said something to me. In a deep voice, I can't recall exactly what he said because it was 5 to 6 years ago, but it still scares me to this day, and I don't know who the man was since there were no men in the house besides me. Incident 2, 2019 to 2020, the second encounter with the man was on a walk home at night after playing a Ouija board with my friend. We asked the board if there was a spirit with us, and it responded yes. We asked the spirit if it wished to cause either of us harm, and it said yes. We asked if it wanted to hurt me, and it said yes. I got scared, and we put it away, and I went home. On the way home, I was paranoid, and I kept checking behind me because I felt like someone was following me. When I finally got back to my house, I saw the large man in black standing between my house and my neighbor's fence. I ran inside as fast as I could and locked the door. I haven't seen him since. Now, 2022, the last time I saw the man was 2 to 3 years ago, and I don't hang out with the friend who has the Ouija board anymore. I still live in the same house and in the same bedroom. When I was in high school, I rode horses competitively and would often go to a local barn to practice. The way the place was set up was that there was a covered arena, and then right across from it was a huge barn that you could see straight through. Anyway, one night it was getting pretty late, but the sun was just setting due to it being summer. I was riding my horse alone on the arena, except for one other man, who was doing his own thing. The handymen were feeding the horses in the big barn, so every time I'd ride by, I'd watch. Since the sun was setting, I could only see their silhouettes due to the poor lighting. Now, I don't believe in anything supernatural, so the next part really freaked me out. As I rode by the barn, I saw a handyman crossing the walkway. Except, halfway through, the form appeared to turn into a dog and lay down. It took me a second to process what I saw, and the next time I rode by, there was just a dog lying in the middle of the walkway. Needless to say, this really freaked me out. I knew I had seen a man, and now it was a dog. I stopped riding, didn't bother washing down my horse, loaded him up, and drove home. When I got home, I went out to our own barn to rinse him off and let him graze for a while before putting him up. My own dogs, German Shepherds, were all in the barn, which was weird because we usually let them in at night. As soon as I entered, they started barking, and my big guy, Poco, started nipping at my heels, which was very out of character for him. Another one of my dogs, Louie, just sat near the barn door, staring out into the darkness, very alert. Obviously, at this point, I'm incredibly on edge, thinking maybe someone had been in there trying to steal our horses, which would explain why my dogs were being so aggressive and why Louie was on such a lookout. I go into my house to wash up and ask my parents if they have seen anyone, and they're all around the kitchen table looking at pictures from one of our motion sensor deer feeders. The pictures show one of our goats being mauled by a mange-y coyote, no, not a chupacabra, and eaten. Again, very weird, because our dogs are very good at keeping a watch out. Needless to say, the whole night was very creepy, and to this day, I'm convinced that the coyote and dog/human I saw at the barn are the same animal. I'm a rational person who doesn't believe in supernatural shit, so for a long time I questioned what I'd really seen. However, it all seemed very real at the time, so I'm convinced it did. I was at a pagan gathering put together by a pagan church to celebrate springtime. We were on an island in the Puget Sound off of Washington, USA, and technically in WA. This one guy I'll call Randy, and this girl who liked me but was to be disappointed, I'll call Carol. We go outside of our cabins at night to see these. I think there might have been some sort of old military installation where we had held a pagan event earlier that day, as it was a nice stage. And I saw. It wasn't lightning bugs, it wasn't flashlights, or whatever you might think. It was a bright, ducking orb of light. I could see them. I could see how intelligently they moved, almost like bugs, and with no effort or wind resistance, they just danced and played. But it was bone-chilling. These I perceived to be spirits. Randy had been joking about it being haunted, and we all saw them, at which point he wanted to go onwards, but me and Carol were like, nope, and we went to bed. I remember there being something about one of the cabins being haunted too. It was an old jail, I think. A couple years ago, when I was about 13, my dad got a call from a friend of his. Friend had shot a huge, 8-point whitetail buck and lost it the night before. The deer was shot with a bow at sunset and ran into the woods. Dad asks if I want to learn about tracking a deer. I'm all for it. Off we go. This is out on Maryland's eastern shore. There are lots of woods, lots of hills, and lots of walking. I am having a blast. Blood trail, fur, the whole thing is fun for me and my dad. We've been out there for maybe an hour. I take a break near a small group of trees that connect to the massive woods where the blood trail went. Dad's friend goes into the woods, and I'm just looking at the trees. Then, I saw something. It was hard to see it, and it's been about a decade since, but I saw what looked like a fox, with a short muzzle, no tail, and really long limbs. Like deer-length ducking pencil limbs. It's just standing there, maybe 20 yards from me. That's not the weird part. That thing kind of loped away. Like those cat videos where the cat is scared, lifts its front feet off the ground, and runs off on its back legs? Like that, only it held its front legs higher, and it ran like that was the way it had run its entire life. Like, that was natural. Dad scared the shit out of me by shouting about the 8-pointer being found. I told my dad I saw a weird animal. He said it may have been a fox. I told him about the legs being weird. He gave me the look. The look that says stop making shit up. Well, I learned how to gut, drag, and track a deer that day. As for what I saw? I've always had a big imagination. I could have been sleep deprived, because 6 a.m. on a Saturday at 13 years old is bullshit. Maybe it was just a fox that moved weirdly. Maybe it was a deer with a weird head. I don't know. But I do know that deer and foxes don't run on their back legs. When I was around 8 years old, my family went to visit my grandparents' house. My brothers and I were all playing outside, being as loud and rambunctious as kids are. When the sun went down, we went to my uncle's room at the back of the house. We played his old Nintendo and Atari for a while, then me and my cousin started playing with toys in the back, and we were having fun when my blood suddenly ran cold and the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I looked at my cousin, and I knew he felt it too. We both turned towards the window, and that's when we saw it. A pale, redhead boy stared back at us with no emotion in his face, but the most frightening thing were his eyes, black as coal, like each eye socket was a glimpse into an incomprehensible darkness. I made the stupid mistake of making eye contact with it, and I felt a crushing fear that I've never felt before or since. Before I could even scream, my grandpa appeared in the doorway with an intense scowl on his face. He spotted the black-eyed boy, charged out the back door, and chased it away, yelling in Cherokee. I had never seen him so angry before or after that. I used to live in Humul, California. It's in San Diego, East County, and believe it or not, it's in the mountains. There's a road called Skyline Truck Trail that I used to live off of. It's higher in elevation and mostly just lonely hills and mountains with a snake of highways through them. Our driveway was around half a mile long, as you had to drive down a dirt road and into the wooded area a minute or so before you reached our actual driveway. As you made your way down through the wooded area, if you looked to your left, there were dense trees, and the earth sort of dropped into a canyon. My brothers and I each claimed a chunk of the several acres as our own. I called that drop the canyon. Anyway, now that the setting is established and you get a little bit of the layout, here's what happened. My grandmother had been living with us, and my parents were out. We had gotten into some argument where I had acted out before she poured water over my head in front of my siblings. I was humiliated, and I waited for everyone to fall asleep before I hopped out of the window. I left my shoes in the house so they would think I was still at home, not as intelligent as I had thought, but I was 11, and I took my older brother's metal bat. I felt kind of cool taking it with me, but it also made me feel a little more secure. I ran down through the wooded area and into my area, my canyon. It was when I got down to the bottom in my usual spot where I sat that I realized how different the canyon was at night. The sun was down, and it was incredibly dark. I realized how ducking terrified I was and froze, too scared to move to go back home and too scared to stay. It was awful enough, and then it happened. Right when I froze, I felt a sickly kind of cold come over me and a strange chill. I heard a low howl, almost like a silly parody of ghost noise, ooh, but much lower in pitch. It felt like it was doing it on the back of my neck, and I felt almost like vibrations on my back, like someone was drumming on it. It stopped, and the worst feeling wasn't that it was there, it was that I knew what it looked like and hadn't turned around. It was all black, with almost cartoonish yellow eyes and large teeth open in kind of a stupid, idiotic open-mouth grin, like it was quietly laughing at me. I screamed loud and hard and ran, tearing my feet up. I ran in the opposite direction of my house, and I could feel it watching me but not chasing, I felt, but I didn't know for sure because I didn't look back. I kind of clawed my way out of there and made it to the main road at some point because my neighbor picked me up and brought me back to the house. I was pretty ducked up and never told anyone about it. I must have dropped the bat, we never found it. I was walking home from my grandparents' house a couple months ago, and it was getting dark hella quick, so I thought it would be quicker to use the old railroad track to get to town. I've walked this track my whole life, but I've always hated walking it at night. It starts out quite peaceful. There is nothing like the sound of the creek flowing beside the track. When I finally pass the first bridge, what's left of it at least, all of a sudden everything goes quiet, so I stop and slowly look around me. I saw nothing, but I have this heavy feeling like I'm being watched. A little ways down the track behind me, I hear something moving towards me. At first, I thought it was my cousin trying to scare me, but he drove home. I started sprinting, and I ran for a while, actually not that long. I gotta stop smoking, before I heard a man's voice from the tree line. He screamed Isa, this means stop in Choctaw. When I heard it, my heart rate increased dramatically. I felt it in my ears. I didn't want to look, but I did anyway. I couldn't see anything because it was pitch black. I saw this dark figure, it was darker than the shadows, beside a tree. Growing up, my grandma always told us stories about spirits and how to tell the difference between the good and the bad. The feeling I had when I looked directly at it made me run as fast as I could. When I finally reached the second bridge, I heard it laughing behind me. At this point, I thought I was tired of running, so I stopped, turned on the flashlight on my phone, and turned around. I felt sick to my stomach, then I felt weak and dropped to my knees. I no longer had the strength to hold myself up. As I looked at the stars, I thought whatever this thing was, it had to be strong enough to make me fall to my knees. I was so close to town I could hear the highway, and as I lay there, I thought, damn, I guess this is how I die. I heard it laugh again, but this time it sounded like it was far away, and then my strength came back, so I quickly got up and ran. When I got into town, I called my cousin to pick me up and take me home. On the way home, I told him everything that happened. At first, I thought he was going to laugh and say I was crazy, but he didn't say anything, he just drove. When we finally got to the road to my house, he stopped the truck, and he said the same thing happened to his father when he was fishing a couple weeks before it happened to me. It was 10 years ago, I was 15, and I was home alone while my mom was at work. I was laying on my bed that night, trying to get some sleep, but, being a summer night, it was so hot I couldn't sleep at all. I decided to get up and go outside to the backyard to get some fresh air and drink a soda. It was a starry night, but there was no moon, no clouds, and a light wind was blowing in the trees, a pretty night indeed. Worth mentioning is that, behind my house, there was a huge, thick forest full of trees and wildlife, not anymore, and it could get pretty dark and creepy at nights like that one. My backyard was walled, so I could only see the top of the 3 houses behind the wall. I had been out there for, 15 minutes when I heard it. Laughter, a maniacal, high-pitched, and mocking laughter. I heard it right behind the wall that was 6 feet in front of me, and it lasted for 5 seconds, but for me, it was an eternity. And as suddenly as it appeared, it ceased, and only the wind was heard again. Needless to say, I was frozen, not knowing what to do. Then I snapped out and ran inside my house, closing every door behind me and hiding under my blankets. I turned on the TV and wasn't able to sleep until my mom got home in the morning. I will never know what that laughter was, but in my town there are legends about witches that still reside in the forest or in caves by the river and who roam around by night. I couldn't say if that was the case, but that laugh will haunt me for the rest of my life. The worst paranormal thing I have ever experienced. I used to hunt raccoons with dogs at night as a teenager. The farmer beside us let us hunt his property. There was an old, long abandoned 2-story house with a basement on it, way back off the road, sitting in between two roads with no possible way for outside light to shine over there. No electricity or plumbing had ever been run to the house. It had chains built into the basement walls for slaves. Anyway, multiple times while sitting and listening to the dogs run with our flashlights off, we could watch what looked like a candle pass by in the windows. I also had an experience alone in that house. I was out squirrel hunting as a cold front came through with a nasty cold wind blowing. I wasn't supposed to be in there, but I went in anyway to get out of the cold. At first, it was pleasant, until I went into the basement and touched the chains. The atmosphere turned on me, it felt evil, and a door slammed. It was a windstorm outside, but the timing was just so perfect. Anyway, I got the hell out of there and ran home. When I was a teenager, a lot of things happened around my parents' house. The house was built in 1928, and the front door always made a particular noise when opened and closed. It kind of stuck. The two swinging doors you go through next have a recognizable sound because of the stained glass they mainly consist of. And the stairs are wooden. So one night my mom and I were watching TV when we both heard the front door open and close, then the stained glass doors and definite footsteps going up the stairs and footsteps walking around in my parents' bedroom. So I looked at my mom and asked her if she was expecting someone to get home, but she didn't. So I went upstairs to see who was there, but of course nobody's there. It happened so often that we sort of looked at each other like here we go again, and left it at that. More stuff happened, to the point where I was just like, okay, show me a ghost or something. Now I want to see it too, even if I SHT my pants. But I never did. My mom claims she did, though. And she's quite level-headed. So even though I don't believe in this stuff, I do know it happened. More than once. It was summer in Pulaski, Tennessee. Me and two of my girlfriends were bored, and we had heard about this house near the Tennessee/Alabama border, called the Ant House. We get directions and go in my little red Pontiac and park on the gravel road facing the way we came in, just in case we need to flee. People or other college students apparently hid out in the house and drank or whatever. Anyway, we get settled, and there appears to be no one around. I turned off my headlights, and we kind of just sat there admiring the way the moon was lighting the field in front of the house and making small talk. One of my friends notices a black little cat coming down the slight incline of the road. She says something, and we're all just like, "Aw, lol." But the cat didn't stop in front of the car, it was fast trotting towards us like it was going to hop on the car. I had my window open halfway, and so I wanted to spooky the cat so it wouldn't jump on my car and try to get in, no idea if it had rabies, etc. So I turn on my headlights, roll up my window, and just stare at the cat because it was maybe 5 feet from the car. As soon as my lights came on, the cat vanished like smoke blown in the wind, no running away, just going. We all saw it. That's when we were like, what the duck? Nope, we're good, and got the hell out of there. I haven't had any real experiences since, but that was the incident that turned me into more of a believer. So back in Indiana, I lived in an apartment just off a state highway. I used to take my trash out, walk my dog at night near the trash dumpster, and field it back. I noticed one night that the field seemed devoid of sound, no wildlife, no vehicle noise, not anything. My dog also wouldn't want to potty in the field, she would just whine at me. After a few weeks, I gave up walking her over there, but I would still run trash out. Then I started to get the sensation that I was being followed. One evening, while headed back from a trash run, I turned to walk up my stairs and noticed a figure peering around the corner of my breezeway with abnormally large, vacant black eyes. It had long fingers and looked gangly. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. So I ran up the stairs and locked the door. I listened at the door, but I couldn't hear anything. I heard absolutely no sound, and my apartment faced a highway. After the incident, I had friends I trusted not to judge me when I came out and took a walk to the trash bin at night. They, too, would get the eerie sensation and notice the lack of sound. To this day, I still have no clue what I saw or experienced. My husband and I were camping in Badlands National Park one October a few years ago. The entire park was nearly abandoned since peak camping season had ended, but we were fine with that. It felt secluded and exciting to us relative newlyweds. There were no towns to speak of, only the small village nearby, where there was a school, a church, and a few shops and hotels for tourists. At night, it got so dark that you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. The first, and only, night we stayed there, my husband and I met the ranger on duty, who warned us that it was just us that night, and the ranger's cabin was far from our sight in the event that we ran into trouble. But we were experienced campers, so this news really didn't worry us at all. It just made the prospect more exciting, being all alone in such a beautiful place. After we set up the tent and cooked our dinner, we decided to get set up inside the tent since we were coming off a long day of driving and were pretty exhausted. We talked for a while before I heard the heavy, regulated breathing that told me I was the last one awake, and I noticed how profoundly quiet it was outside. We lived in Chicago at the time, so I should have found this silence a welcome change, but I didn't. It unnerved me deeply. A few hours later, I jolted awake, only to feel the alert body of my husband sitting up next to me. He was listening for something. Almost immediately, I heard what must have woken me, the frenzied beating of what sounded like hundreds of drums. We held our breath as we listened for what felt like hours. It never wavered or lessened. In fact, it seemed to get louder and louder. Eventually, we both laid down and tried to fall asleep again, but neither of us did. We left at first light the next morning. As we left the park, the ranger asked if we had any trouble and commented that we looked like we hadn't slept a wink. We looked at each other for a second before we decided to tell her what we had heard. She stopped for a moment to consider this before she tapped the hood of our car and tersely wished us a safe journey, with no explanation about the drums. On the way home, I looked up the history of the Badlands and found out about the ghost dance of the Sioux. Its purpose was to reunite the living with the dead and rid the lands of the homesteaders who had taken them from them. We still don't know what we heard that night, but we both feel it was something paranormal. I still get chills just thinking about it. When I was a kid, maybe between the ages of 11 and 13, I became really fascinated with my grandpa. However, I had never known him, as he passed away before I was born. I would talk to him frequently. I believed he was listening. One day, I was over at my uncle's house with my cousin, the daughter of my uncle. It was just the two of us. We were kids, but old enough at that point to be left alone. We were in her room, and I was telling her about what I had been doing to contact Grandpa. She's younger than me, so she also never knew him. The two of us started talking out loud to him, as I often did when I was alone. In typical cliché child fashion, we asked him to give us a sign if he was with us. The bedroom door was completely closed. No windows were open. No breeze. No draft. The doorknob turned and the door opened, only to reveal no one on the other side who would have opened it. I used to live in a duplex with a cemetery down the street. When I moved into this duplex, I heard that the guy who was living there before me was really weird, and he eventually got evicted. I was scraping candle wax from almost every surface when I moved in, and I always had an off feeling about the place. Soon after moving in, weird things started happening. My bed would vibrate intensely at night. It would wake me up. I had sleep paralysis about 4 times a week when I had never had it before, and my dreams would be downright terrifying. My crystals would disappear, and my sage and incense would go missing often. Then, one night, I was sitting on the couch, and my leg started burning. I looked down, and I had scratch marks on my left thigh. I freaked out and went to my dad's house. My dad, of course, asked me all the logical questions. Did you scratch yourself on anything? Did you scratch yourself? Etc. But no. I bit my nails to stubs, and I was literally sitting on the couch watching a movie. My scratch welts went away later that night. I told my dad I was going to take a shower. I turned the shower on but took a minute to brush my hair before getting in. My right leg started burning. I looked down, and I had scratches on my right thigh. I ran out of the bathroom to immediately show my dad. They were fresh and welted above my skin. My dad had a horrified look on his face. He kept telling me we were going to see a priest. And I did. I wasn't able to leave the apartment for a couple more months, but while I was still there, I ended up getting into a horrible car accident. DRS found precancerous cells on my cervix, and I started to get trapped in my dreams. I would be screaming at myself to open my eyes and turn on the light, but I physically couldn't. Yeah, when I moved out, all of that SHT went away. I still had run-ins with the paranormal, but nothing to that extent. It was a very scary year. Whenever we went on road trips when I was a kid, 1990s, my parents would put my brother and I to bed, then wake us up in the middle of the night to drive through the night so there'd be no traffic. We'd sleep the whole time and usually wake up at our destination. On this trip, we were driving from SC to see my father's family in Tennessee. So they wake us up, and we all load up in the car and hit the road. We turned out of our neighborhood and had to drive past this old cemetery that was right by the interstate, not even a mile from our house. As we were driving past, all of a sudden we all saw this ghostly woman right in front of the car, and all of us yelled, "Stop." My dad slammed on the brakes, but he went right through her. We all saw her as clear as day. She looked like a larger, older black woman, and when we saw her face, her eyes just looked like large black holes. I'll never forget the way her face looked. She was actually walking across the road right towards the cemetery, like she'd been out for a stroll and was going back to her resting place or something. When the car stopped, we all looked back, and there was nothing there. We sat there for a minute, and my mom was telling my dad to go back, but he said hell no and booked it onto the ramp. There was no sound or anything when we went through her, and we were all super freaked out. We all saw the exact same thing. As I grew older, I could never get this story out of my mind, so I finally decided to do some research on the cemetery, and it turns out that it is a historic African American cemetery. The town has kind of just grown up around it. I also found an article where they once found some unmarked graves in South Carolina that they determined were African American soldiers who died in the Civil War and were just buried in unmarked graves. They had a big ceremony and were relocated to this cemetery, but it was an African American cemetery long before that. From back when white people didn't want black people to be buried in their cemeteries. When I was 13, my great-grandmother came to live with us. She was in her 80s and not in the best health. After a few months, she passed, and though it wasn't a surprise, it was still quite hard for my father, as he had raised her when his mother abandoned him with her in Mexico. 2 weeks after her passing, I was up late watching TV in the living room, which was right next to the kitchen, and started getting a strange feeling, as though I was being watched. It struck me as odd since my family was asleep. I turned to look into the kitchen, as I thought I'd seen something out of the corner of my eye. It was then that I saw a light silhouette of a hunched figure standing in the kitchen. Initially, I figured it was just the light from the TV and my eyes adjusting to looking into the dark kitchen. It took a moment to register, but once I realized what I was seeing, it was a silhouette similar to my great-grandmother's just standing in the kitchen. My body immediately began feeling chills, and the only thing I could do was grab my blanket and cover my head in fear. Once I mustered the bravery to look, which took a while, the figure was gone. That was my first experience with the paranormal. Needless to say, it was not my last. So this happened 4 years ago, when I was 15. It was my sophomore year of high school, and one of my friends, we'll call her A, invited me to go camping over spring break with her family, mom, dad, baby brother, and sister, and another friend, we'll call her S, in Anza Borrego. Important, my entire life, I've always had paranormal experiences, and so did A, so we bonded over this. And S didn't believe in ghosts. So we're at this campsite, and it's time for bed. A, S, and I shared a tent, while A's parents shared a tent with the little siblings who were both under 5. S fell asleep quickly, but A and I were having a bit more trouble because our tent was very close to the campsite's graveyard. At one point, it felt as though someone came over and was shaking our tent really hard. It wasn't wind, and it wasn't her parents. The rest of the camping trip goes by, and nothing too creepy happens, except swings that would swing by themselves, until the morning we left. S and I were getting ready together in the campsite bathroom, which was up the dirt path from our tents. Then it sounded like someone was walking up the dirt path and stopping right in front of the door. Whoever walked up then let out a very shallow, ragged breath, and then a voice that honestly didn't even sound human said, "I see you." Both the breath and what this thing said echoed throughout the bathroom. S and I looked at each other, obviously scared as hell, grabbed our stuff, and decided to make a break for it. But when we opened the door, nobody was there. On the dirt path, you could only see 2 pairs of footprints, S and mine. We still ran back to where A and her family were, and they were finishing packing up the supplies. We asked all of them if they played a prank on us, and they all said no. A's dad then told us, on the last day of the trip, literally as we were leaving, "Oh, yeah, apparently this campsite is haunted. I saw it online." And S now believes in ghosts. The campsite is in Vallecito County Park. I grew up in rural North Carolina. I grew up in the woods, where there used to be a water mill. A family lived there back in the 1940s. The parents had 2 daughters and 1 son. Unfortunately, one of the daughters got caught under the water wheel and drowned. Ever since I was a kid, I always heard humming and low singing in the woods when I was out tromping them. But the one thing that really scared me one night was when I was older. I worked for the sheriff's office, and I had left work early one night due to being over a lot of hours, so I got home around 2:30ish, and when I pulled up, I saw the figure of a little girl standing right beside my garage. And when I got out of my car, she was gone. The next experience I had was when I was out hunting in the same woods. It was a super quiet, beautiful fall evening. I had just gotten down into my seat when, all of a sudden, I started hearing the same humming and singing I had heard multiple times over the years. But I heard what sounded like someone walking towards me. I looked everywhere and couldn't see anything. And I heard a laugh, but not the same laugh as before. So as I was climbing down my tree stand, a rock hit my boot. And once again, I heard the laughter. Now, mind you, the area I was hunting was about 3 miles deep in the woods, where there was no one around. So I brought my brother, cousin, and a few friends down there one night, and we were going to just sit and listen and see if we could hear anything. We were down there playing cards and joking when all of us heard what sounded like someone who was in distress. We all got quiet and listened, and we could hear what sounded like someone breathing heavily. And the thing that confuses me about that night is if it was the little girl or something more dark. Sometimes I think things are better left alone. I'm 18 years old, and in those years I have had some crazy experiences. My family, mainly my mom, dabbled in Wicca and witchcraft. My experiences started to happen around the time I turned 13. Around that age, I was starting to get sleep paralysis, like 1 or twice a month around 14. When I lived with my mom in her apartment, I got sleep paralysis one night. I shifted into a night terror while paralyzed. I was in an all-white hallway with no windows or doors, and there was a little office. I remember the whole layout of the setting that the night terror put me in during paralysis. I was getting chased by this gray-skinned human-shaped figure with no face, but it had like a mouth flap. It was wearing blue nurse scrubs. This thing chases me down this hall, past the office, and into another hallway. In this hallway, I reach a dead end, and my back is against the wall. The creature lifts his mouth flap, showing long, razor-sharp teeth, and lunges at me. After that, I shifted out of paralysis and looked over to my closet, where I saw a shadow quickly move into the closet. The same closet would open and close constantly throughout the years I've lived there. This second encounter was when I lived with my dad, and my dad's house is where I currently live. My boyfriend and I still experience bad energy and hear and see stuff. When I first moved in with my dad one night, I tried to go to bed, but my kitten was lying next to me. I ended up shifting into sleep paralysis. During the paralysis, I saw my kitten float up. My cat was levitating, and it shifted into different small animals. The last thing it turned into was a bird with a cat tail and a lizard head. While levitating, it turns its head and looks at me and hisses, and I shift out of the paralysis. 3 years later, I walked into the dining room and got hissed at. The growing and hissing happen often and are recent. My boyfriend even heard the hissing and the growing. I don't know if something is attached to me or if it's the house, but if anyone knows anything similar to this experience, please let me know. Well, my husband and I were in bed one night when I heard a disembodied child's voice say, "Mama?" The voice was close to my ear and so clear. I just laid there eyes wide open. A few seconds later, my husband and I simultaneously rolled over to face each other, and he asked me, "Did you hear that?" I asked him, "Hear what?" For validation and hoping for something other than what I had heard, "I'm a scaredy cat." "Okay," he said, "I heard a little kid say mama." Now, we wouldn't have thought much about it had my young daughter been home, but she was at her dad's an hour away. The streets were barren as it was well past midnight. I have no logical explanation as to what it was or why we heard it. Thankfully, we never heard it again, but it's worth mentioning that we used to have the worst arguments in that house, overly petty stuff. We moved almost a year later. Your guess is as good as mine. I had just gotten back from my first or second deployment, 2002 or 2003, and went camping with my wife and 2 other couples. We hiked to our, not quite backwoods, but pretty far off the map, spot on the shore of a lake, with pretty heavy, dark woods behind us. It was a fun way to unwind, fish, and drink a little bit. That particular deployment was stressful for many reasons. The first night, I slept like the dead, nothing happened. The second night, I had a real fidgety light sleep and woke up almost hourly. I went outside alone to look at the stars because I didn't want to wake up my wife, and after about 20 minutes, I would guess, I heard what could only be described as my wife's voice, which was oddly distorted and as clear as a bell tone, calling out my name and asking for help. I got so unnerved that I stuck my head into the tent to make sure she didn't somehow wander off, and she was fast asleep. I shined my brightest light into the woods towards the voice but saw nothing. I got kind of freaked out but went to lay back down. Then, over coffee the next morning, my best friend, who was in the tent next to me, said, "Jim, why were you calling my goddamn name from the woods at 0330 this morning? Dude, that shit is not funny." I told him I was in my tent at that time, and we just kind of dropped the subject. It was just very odd to me that it happened to 2 of us on the same night, and I really couldn't blame PTSD dreams or anything like that. The only person I told about it was my wife, and I'm not sure she entirely believed me. I had a few unexplainable incidents that happened to me in my old house. I used to paint a lot a long time ago, sometimes until 1 or 2 a.m. My parents and sisters would be asleep by then, and I'd sit in the dining room and paint for hours. One time, While painting, I looked at the time, and it was 2 a.m. Our dining room was in the middle. To my left were 2 rooms, my parents' room and my room. To the right were our living room, bathroom, and my grandma's room. So, if I looked to the right, I'd only see the bathroom. My grandma's room was empty at that time, and all the lights were off on my right. Only the dining room light was on as I was painting, and moonlight was coming through the bathroom vent. I looked there for a second, and it seemed like there was a really long black figure, like 2 very long legs. The thing walked out of my grandma's room and left through our main door in the living room. I couldn't process what had just happened, but it scared me, and I immediately packed all my things and ran to my bedroom. I didn't tell anyone about this because I thought I was concentrating on something for a long time, so it could have been a shadow of a passing car or something. I eventually forgot about it. But what's strange is that my uncle stayed at our house one time, and he saw the exact same thing. He was telling my sisters about it, and I couldn't believe it. He described the same 2 long legs. I still remember it, even after all this time. I was 5 at the time, yet I remember it as clear as day. My bedroom was down a really long hallway, and the light bulbs in my mother's apartment would always burn out. I was used to it, and I wasn't scared of the dark. That all changed that day. My mother's bedroom was on the opposite end of the hallway, next to the living room, and in front of the bathroom. I was drawing in my bedroom, way past my bedtime, when I heard a knock on my door. I understood I had been found out, and I apologized before turning my lamp off. Suddenly, the doorknob on my bedroom door started shaking violently. I thought my mom was freaking out on me again, and I was a pretty brave kid who didn't let myself get intimidated. I walked right through the room and opened the door, but there wasn't anybody. I don't know why, but I was suddenly overwhelmed with fear. I don't think I've ever been this scared in my life to this day, yet I've had weirder things happen. I ran down the dark hallway, and I was under the impression that something had chased me through the darkness, but I didn't see anything. I got to my mother's bedroom and snuggled up to her while she was sleeping. Unfortunately, she had pretty violent nightmares that would sometimes cause her to punch holes in the walls, and this day, she punched me in the face. I would have spent the rest of the night crying on her bedroom floor if she hadn't woke up to comfort me. There's been a lot more things that happened in that apartment, including incidents with shadow figures. So my grandfather owns a beach house in Wildwood Crest, New Jersey, and most of my family goes down there in the summer. So this event occurred on June 16th. So that weekend was the Barefoot Country concert in Wildwood, and all my older cousins went, but I am too young to go. So the only people in the house were me, my grandfather, and my aunt, who were both asleep upstairs. So I was chilling on the couch on FaceTime with my friends when, all of a sudden, I heard noises from downstairs. At first, I thought it was my cousins, but it was only 10:45 p.m., so there was no way they would be back yet. So I go downstairs to check, and I grab a flashlight. So our downstairs has the staircase in the kitchen that looks into our family room, then there is a hallway that has my room, 2 rooms for my cousins and siblings, a bathroom, and then another little hallway that has a laundry room. So I checked my bedroom, and there was nothing. So I went to check one of my cousins' rooms. But as I was walking, I stepped into a puddle of dog piss, which had apparently gone unnoticed. So as I was cleaning that up, I heard a noise from my cousin's room that I was going to check on before I stepped in the piss. So I opened the door and shined my flashlight in there to see a 6-foot figure just standing in the closet. I immediately flicked on the light in the room, and the shadow was gone. And it couldn't have been my shadow, as mine was on the floor. I ran to look in the closet, and there was nothing. I ran back upstairs and went to watch TV. I haven't told anyone, but I think that house is haunted. And this isn't the first incident. Last year, one of my cousins woke up to find her friend's name scratched into her arm. Mind you, none of her friends were down with us or any of our cousins. I sure as hell didn't do that. I'm convinced that room is haunted. I have plenty, lol, but I will share my mom's because it creeps me out just thinking about it. When she was little, like around 7 years old, she began talking to herself in my grandparents' bedroom. She tells me that because she was the youngest of 9 at the time, no one wanted to play with her, so she opted to do this to keep herself entertained. One day something started to speak back to her. It sounded just like her, so she decided that she would keep talking to whatever was hiding in the closet darkness in the room. She kept this up for months. It freaked my grandma out, and finally she told her to stop talking to herself, but when my mom told her that she wasn't talking to herself and that she was talking to her friend, my grandma told her to cut it off immediately. My mom says that she remembers saying okay, walking into the room, telling the shadow she couldn't be its friend anymore, and walking out of the room. Suddenly, as they walked back to the kitchen, she said that they both heard crying from the room. My mom says my grandma got scared and then rounded up everyone that was home, and they went to our great-aunt's house. My grandma had the house blessed, and my mom says she didn't feel the presence in my grandparents' room, but my mom was forced to play outside from that day on. I was 12 when my family moved into a home, and I remember the first time seeing it while house hunting and knowing this was the one we'd move into. I just remember looking at it from the outside and knowing that something was off. Fast forward a couple years with many experiences. When I was 17, I needed to go to the restroom, so I used the one by the kitchen. It wasn't even late, maybe 10 p.m. What's creepy is that there are windows looking out to the backyard, which has a huge brick wall, so neighbors won't be able to jump over it. There were shutters for the window, and they were closed, but they came off the wall a bit, and if you looked at the side of the shutters, you could see outside. The sink is a little bit to the left of this opening. It takes one tilt of the head to see outside. So I was washing my hands, and like many other times, I felt like I was being watched. I stupidly decided to look out the window. There's something hunched over, 2 inches away from the window, staring at me. I honestly wish I had never seen this. Its skin was red, it had horns and black eyes. The face, I don't know how to describe the face, I just know those were the main characteristics. I even made eye contact with it. It was just freaking staring at me. Even now, talking about it freaks me out. It was also hunched over to fit the frame of how big the window was. And this thing hunched over and came up to about 3/4 of the window. It was so big, and I was only like 10 inches away from its face. Now I don't even use that bathroom at night, and if I have to, I don't look out the window. I have many more experiences at this house. You can just ask if you want to know. I still live in the house, and things have settled down with activity. Mostly because I try to ignore it or make fun of it, so I'm not feeding into it and making it worse. I've worked in the funeral industry for 6 years. It's corporate, so they have a local care center that services 8 individual funeral homes and 2 cremation societies. So it was a typical work day. I worked the night shift and would be on call from 5 p.m. to 8 a.m. Yes, it's very long, but I enjoyed it immensely. Plus, I'm very much a night person. I received the first call for a residential home in the area. The deceased was a woman in her late 50s. The director who took the first call had added notes saying to be extra careful because the family was distraught. I arrived at the home and spoke to the daughter and son. The deceased had died in the back bedroom and had fallen against the door. The woman was fairly obese, weighing 320 pounds, and the fire department had to break the door to the bedroom down to get to her. After accessing the situation and going over paperwork with the family, I explained that we would not be able to get the gurney into the room. Small hallways and tight corners are a nightmare for us in this industry. I explained I would have to set the gurney up in the living room and bring the deceased out to the gurney, and I advised the family to step outside while me and my partner moved the body. It has been a typical day at work so far. We got a sheet under her body and drug her out into the living room. I had set up the gurney in the middle of the room, and right above us was a chandelier. We lifted her up and onto the gurney. The moment she was square on the gurney, the light bulb went out above us. I did not feel cold or scared. I didn't have any negative or scary vibes. Me and my partner just looked at each other. I had a sense that this was some sort of communication. It was almost like this woman was watching us and screamed out when we placed her body on the gurney, seeing and accepting that she was in fact dead. My partner and I drove back to the care center and logged into the case without anything else happening. We both were stunned and had no explanation for the light. A month later, I was visiting some friends and told them the story. We were all sitting outside having drinks, and when I got to the light going out, I snapped my finger, accentuating how the exact moment she was on the gurney, the light had gone out. Guys, when I snapped my finger, all the little plastic lawn lights went out. I honestly couldn't believe it. Since then, nothing else has happened, and I've told the story to other people with no paranormal activity. Did this woman stay with me for that month, or was this another spirit? Out of the thousands of bodies I've picked up and the crazy situations I've been in, I've never had anything like this happen before. It just makes you wonder what's really out there. When I was younger, a group of friends and I were longboarding around a nature park near my house. This nature park had a lake that was bordered by a walkway on one side, with lights maybe every 50 or so feet. We were standing maybe 2 or 3 lights from the end, throwing bread into the water for ducks, when we decided to leave. So we start kicking. I'm at the back of the line when I turn around and notice standing in the beam of the last light, maybe 40 or 50 feet away, what looks like a woman in a white gown with black hair, walking towards us. She had her arms crossed as if she were cold. I watched her for maybe 4 or 5 seconds when she looked up at us and then set off towards us at a dead sprint. We start laughing, thinking someone is ducking with us, but we start kicking pretty hard. It's important to note that when you're kicking hard on a longboard, you can easily cruise at about 15 to 20 miles per hour. So we're all laughing or whatever, and then I turn around again. This woman is catching up to us. We had never seen someone run that fast for that long. We all panicked and began kicking as hard as we could. We were easily at 20 to 25 miles per hour at this point, and as we hit the last light, I dared to turn my head again to notice that this woman was only 15 feet behind us. Her features were exaggerated. Her arms were way too long, her hands were huge, and her fingers looked like they had extra joints in them. I couldn't see any detail in her face. But she was soundlessly keeping pace with my friends and me. The nature park had what we called the boardwalk, which connected it to the nearby subdivision of neighborhoods where I lived. We were kicking as hard as we could for it. She was maybe 5 feet behind me when we hit the wood of the boardwalk. As soon as we did, she just stopped dead in her tracks. We went maybe 50 feet down before we stopped and watched this thing. She stood there for a minute, and then she turned and walked into the tree line of the nearby woods, squatted behind a tree, and poked her head out, watching us. We promptly GTFO. My friends and I only ever talked about it once, and my buddy, who was at the front of the line of friends, was kicking so hard to get away that he tore a hole in his shoe. I was young, maybe 8. Just so you know, I always go to sleep in my bed, and I'd never, ever fall asleep on the couch. My grandpa died, and we got back from his funeral. That night I went to bed in my room as usual, but I woke up in the middle of the night on the living room couch. When I looked up, I saw my grandpa's ghost. It wasn't scary or anything. At the time, it felt natural. He didn't say anything, but there was this understanding between us. I went back to my room and went back to sleep. I would have assumed it was a dream, but it was so vivid and real that it stuck with me for years, especially since I woke up on the couch, which made the moment stick out even more in my mind. It wasn't even I saw a ghost moment. It was just a weird, vivid memory that seemed so normal at the time that I didn't think anything strange about it. When I was about 20, I told my mom that story, and she said, "Was it the day of his funeral? Because I saw his ghost that night too." That ducked my SHT up. I was born and grew up in a town called Shrewsbury, in Shropshire, England. The town has a reputation for being one of the most haunted places in the world. The town is well over 1,000 years old, and a lot of the ruins of old buildings remain, even in the town center. Everyone I know growing up had some sort of experience, haunted or otherwise, at some point in their lives. So, getting to my most haunted experience that spans a number of years, these aren't my only experiences, but this is the one that has affected me the most. My grandparents have a house that all of the family, my mother and her siblings, grew up in. This house has a back bedroom that gives off a vibe that you just don't want to duck with. It's the only room in the house that has the door always closed and is now used as a storeroom that my nan refuses to enter alone. It was used when I was a kid as a spare bedroom for when me and my brother would stay over, but we hated being in that room. One night, me and my brother were asleep in there, and I woke up just in time to look over and see the lighting fixture on the ceiling next to my head. I can even remember the feeling of the cold plaster touching my cheek right before whatever the duck was lifting me. I hit the mattress and immediately started screaming, obviously, and my dad burst into the room to find out what happened. I told him everything, but he was obviously skeptical. I even remember him saying that the room was very cold, even though the heating was on, and there was an odd feeling he couldn't explain. My brother, who was asleep during my incident, said he had a dream that night of an old man standing over him shouting for him to get out, and to this day he is reluctant to talk about it because of how real it felt. Now, this is where it starts to get worse. I was told this was over a month after the first incident, but I was at home, in my house, on the other side of town, and it happened again. Me and my brother at this time used bunk beds, and I slept on the top bunk. My dad was downstairs watching TV, and all of a sudden he said he got a feeling something was wrong, then realized the feeling he felt was the same as it was when I had the incident with my nans. He ran up the stairs and burst into the room just in time to catch me falling from the ceiling. I had been picked up, lifted over the bed safety rail, and was hanging with my head tilted towards the ground, and my dad burst in to see me hanging there in midair for a split second before dropping, and he caught me. He was terrified and could never explain what happened. Nothing ever happened again until I was in my mid-20s. My nan was heading out somewhere for an overnight stay, so I said I would stay the night, feed the dogs, and sleep on the sofa. I did everything stated, went to sleep on the sofa, but woke up in the morning in the spare room, at the back of the room, behind a load of storage boxes. It took me 5 minutes to move the boxes out of my way to reach the door to get out, and to this day, now 14 years later, I've no idea how the hell I got in that room, over those boxes, and to the back section of the room without damaging anything. I've never been more frightened after waking up in all my life, and I've never stayed another night in that house since. My nan refuses to talk about that room. My granddad was the same prior to his death. I've no idea what happened in that house or what spirit or worse is living in that back room, but I'll never go back in that room for as long as I live. When I worked on a reserve, I was doing some yard work at the youth care facility. I was completely alone. It was just turning to winter, and I didn't expect the night to fall as quickly as it did. This house is a 15-minute drive either way from any town, very rural, and on old farmland. I had to bring the leaves I was raking to the edge of a small cliff at the edge of the property and dump them off. On the other side of the small cliff, there is a forest. As I bring the wheelbarrow to dump the leaves, clear as ducking day, something right in front of me whistles at me from the darkness. Like the call you would use to get someone's attention. I froze, then backed up while watching the tree line, before turning and ducking running. I waited till more staff got on, but I finished the job. The creepiest thing is that the nation believes you never whistle after dark. So what, the duck whistled at me? Another time, my skeptic boyfriend, my little sister, who will be called A, and I were chilling in the kitchen. My dad was asleep in the living room. My other sister was half asleep in her bedroom. My younger brother was downstairs playing video games. My mom was leaving for work, and she did her usual round of hugs and goodbyes to everyone in the family except for my dad, who was sleeping, and then she left. About 10 minutes later, while we were on all of our phones, from A's room that faces the kitchen, we heard yelling. In A's own ducking voice, something was yelling, "Moom. Mom. Mom." From her own room. All of us, at the same time, looked up from our phones and looked at each other. Goosebumps are all over my body. My boyfriend was like, what was that? And we were all shocked. That actually sounded like A, I said. We then went and checked on my other younger sister, who was still half asleep. We asked if she was yelling for Mom, and she said, "Why would I do that? Mom just left." Good point. It was intensely creepy to hear something using my little sister's voice from her room when she was sitting right in front of us. For a while, my boyfriend didn't even want to talk about it and would shut down the conversation, but it actually changed his mind from being a skeptic. That house was ducking nuts. I live in ultra-rural Alabama. When I say ultra-rural, I mean even the closest Dollar General is almost 20 minutes away. I live at the foot of a heavily wooded mountain. The further you drive up, the less populated it becomes. Even though I lived in this spot for my entire life, I had never driven up the mountain, just because there was no need. The city was in the opposite direction of the mountain. From what I knew about going up, you just drove up and passed a few houses and eventually hit a dead end and would have to turn around. Well, one day, I had a friend over, and we decided we wanted to hop on my golf cart and take a little joy ride up the mountain. We drove for about 30 minutes, and we had only really seen some beautiful forests and passed a couple properties. But at this point, we came upon a spot in the road with a clearing off to the right. As we got closer, I realized it was a cemetery. I pulled over into the cemetery and turned my golf cart off. The main reason for this was curiosity. I had no idea there was a cemetery up the mountain, and it was strange to me considering we barely had anybody living on the mountain, much less this far up. So my friend and I hop out of the cart and start walking towards the graves. Like I said, I fully believe in spirits and being respectful towards the dead. But my friend didn't at the time. So I'm respectfully looking around, reading the markers, and attempting to stay a 6-foot distance from the headstones so I wasn't walking on top of the graves. Well, here my friend goes, on her phone, walking all over the graves. I think she even cracked a couple of jokes about the names on some of the headstones. Some of them were kind of weird, considering the people died in the late 1800s and early 1900s. After I've sufficiently explored, I start walking back to the car. Aloud, I declare, half jokingly, "Thank you, ghosts, for letting us walk around your space. Sorry, we walked all over your graves." My friend yells at me, "Duck those ghosts." I just rolled my eyes, but honestly, I felt a slight shiver down my spine after she said it. I was kind of nervous at this point. We both hopped back in the golf cart, and I turned the key. Of course, it wouldn't start. I turned the key multiple times, but it seemed like the battery was dead. For the 3 years I owned this golf cart, I never had an issue with it. So in my non-skeptic brain, I immediately felt that this was happening because of what my friend said about the ghosts, but honestly, at this point, I was scared. I didn't want to believe what I was thinking. So, I decided to call my dad for help. I checked my service, and I had 2 bars, so I was good on cell signal. I called him, and the phone rang 5 times before he answered. I heard nothing on the other end, so I said, "Hello?" And I could hear heavy, raspy breathing in response. As soon as my brain slightly processed what I was hearing, my dad hung up. I tried to call him back, but my cell signal had now dropped off completely, even though I hadn't moved at all. So at this point, even my friend looked scared. We're both thinking the same thing. I'm beginning to hyperventilate, and I lay my head down on the steering wheel. I just began to pray out loud for protection and help starting the cart. I tell my friend to pray as well, and she says, "Please let the cart start." I'm sorry for what I said. I turn the key, the cart starts, and I peel out of there as fast as possible. When I get home, my dad is outside working on one of his projects. My friend and I walk up to him, and I ask him why he hung up on me because I needed help. He said he never received a call from me. I told him that's impossible because he picked up, and I heard him breathing over the phone. He showed me his recent calls, and he had no calls or missed calls from me. This was almost 3 years ago, and I haven't been back to the cemetery or had any other paranormal experiences since. I was like 9 years old. I was sleeping in my parents' bed. At that point, I think it was a Saturday morning, and my dad had gone bike riding with his friends real early, and I woke up and got in bed with my mom. I was having a bad dream, and I woke up, looked around, and went to pee. When I got back into bed, there was a pale white hand waving at me from behind the closet. I thought I was dreaming, but I was so shocked I couldn't do anything. I kind of put it in the back of my mind until, a year later, my older cousin said she had seen a hand waving at her behind her mirror when I was at her house. It made me realize I really experienced that and didn't imagine it.